The only warning was a sound like a broomstick sweeping through the air. No engine noise, no radar signature, no lights. Just the soft, eerie whooshing in the darkness above the German trenches. The sound of wind passing over canvas wings and wooden struts as a plywood biplane glided out of the night sky, engines dead, carrying 2 bombs and 2 women who had turned off everything that could give them away. Then the bombs fell. Then the screaming started. Then the engine roared back to life, and the plane climbed into the black sky and disappeared. 20 minutes later, it happened again, and again, and again. 8 times a night, sometimes 18. The German soldiers on the Eastern Front called them Nachthexen, night witches, because the sound of their approach was like nothing mechanical. It was spectral, otherworldly, the sound of something that shouldn't exist and couldn't be stopped. They were the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, an all-female Soviet air unit. Every pilot, every navigator, every mechanic, every armorer. They flew open cockpit biplanes made of plywood and canvas, designed in 1928 for crop dusting and flight training. They carried no parachutes because the weight would have grounded them. They carried no guns because there was no room. They carried no radios, no radar, no instruments beyond a compass, a stopwatch, a map, and a pencil. They flew 30,000 missions. They dropped 23,000 tons of bombs. They destroyed fuel depots, ammunition dumps, railways, river crossings, and the sleep of every German soldier within 50 miles of their operating zone. 23 of them were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. 32 of them were killed. They were aged 17 to 26. They colored their lips with navigation pencils and painted flowers on the sides of their planes. And any German pilot who shot one of them down was automatically awarded the Iron Cross. Not because it was difficult, but because the Germans were that desperate to stop them. The Night Witches existed because one woman refused to take no for an answer. Marina Raskova was a Soviet pilot and navigator who had broken multiple long-distance flight records in the 1930s. She was famous. The Soviet press called her the Russian Amelia Earhart. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Raskova was flooded with letters from women across the country. Pilots, mechanics, students, women who had learned to fly through Soviet paramilitary aviation clubs and now wanted to use those skills against the enemy that was burning its way toward Moscow. The Soviet military said no. Women could serve in support roles. They could not fly in combat. Raskova went to Stalin. Whatever she said worked. On October 8, 1941, Stalin issued Order Number 0099, authorizing the creation of 3 all-female aviation regiments. Raskova was given command of the project. Within weeks, over 1,000 women had volunteered. They were sent to Engels, a town on the Volga River, for training. The women were given men's uniforms that didn't fit, boots so large they had to stuff them with torn bedding to keep them on their feet. They were mocked by male officers. They were harassed. They were told they were playing at soldiers and would be sent home within weeks. They trained through the winter. They learned to fly, to navigate, to maintain aircraft, to load bombs, to read maps in darkness. They cut their hair short. They slept in freezing barracks. They endured everything the military threw at them because the alternative was going home. And home was being overrun by the Wehrmacht. By the spring of 1942, they were ready. The most experienced pilots were assigned to a fighter regiment. The next most qualified went to a dive bomber regiment. The least experienced, the ones considered not good enough for the modern aircraft, were given something else entirely. They were given the Polikarpov PO-2, a biplane designed in 1928. 2 seats, an open cockpit, a frame made of plywood, wings covered in canvas, a maximum speed of 60 miles per hour when loaded with bombs, slower than most cars on a highway. It was, by the standards of 1942 aviation, a death trap. The women of the 588th called it a coffin with wings. The PO-2 should never have been used in combat. It was slow, fragile, and flammable. A single tracer round could turn it into a fireball before the crew had time to react. It had no armor, no defensive weapons, no ejection system. And the women who flew it carried no parachutes, partly because of the weight, partly because at the altitudes they flew, a parachute wouldn't have opened in time anyway. But the plane had three things that made it, against all logic, one of the most effective weapons on the Eastern Front. First, it was invisible. Its plywood and canvas construction didn't show up on German radar. Its small engine produced almost no heat signature for infrared detection. In the dark, at low altitude, it was a ghost. Second, it was too slow to shoot down. The PO-2's maximum speed was lower than the stall speed of both the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190, the two primary German fighters. A German pilot couldn't slow down enough to engage a PO-2 without falling out of the sky himself. Trying to shoot one down was like trying to catch a butterfly with a freight train. Third, it could land anywhere. A field, a road, a clearing in a forest. The 588th operated from improvised airstrips just behind the front lines, moving constantly, setting up at dusk and disappearing at dawn. The women turned every disadvantage into a weapon. And then they invented a tactic that made the Germans afraid to sleep. The technique was precise and terrifying. The 588th operated in groups of 3 aircraft. The first 2 would fly toward the German position with engines running, drawing searchlight beams and anti-aircraft fire. While the Germans were focused on them, the third plane would cut its engine at altitude and glide, silently, invisibly, toward the target. The only sound was the wind over the wings, the whooshing, the broomstick. The navigator in the rear seat would calculate the approach using a stopwatch, a compass, and the fires burning below. At the release point, she dropped the bombs. 2 bombs. That was all the PO-2 could carry, 1 under each wing. Then the pilot restarted the engine, a terrifying moment because sometimes, in the freezing air at altitude, the engine wouldn't catch, and climbed back to safety. She flew back to the airstrip, landed, rearmed, and took off again. And again, and again. 8 to 18 missions a night, each sortie lasting 30 to 50 minutes. The women flew from dusk until dawn, landing only to reload bombs and then launching again into the darkness. They slept during the day, when they slept at all. The cumulative effect was devastating, not just in physical damage, though the 588th destroyed 17 river crossings, 12 fuel depots, 176 armored cars, and 9 railways, but in psychological warfare. German soldiers on the Eastern Front couldn't sleep. Every night, from midnight until sunrise, the whooshing came. The bombs fell. The screaming followed. And then, silence, until the next one came. The Germans were so desperate to stop the Night Witches that they awarded the Iron Cross, one of the highest military decorations in the German armed forces, to any pilot who shot one down. The women of the 588th fought for 3 years across some of the bloodiest ground on the Eastern Front, the Caucasus, the Crimea, Poland, and eventually to the outskirts of Berlin. They flew through anti-aircraft fire that turned the sky white. They flew through searchlight beams that blinded them. They flew through winters so cold that touching the metal parts of the aircraft with bare skin would rip the flesh away. Nadyezhda Popova flew 852 missions. On one night alone, she flew 18 sorties. After one mission, her ground crew counted 42 bullet holes in her aircraft. She flew it again the next night. Irina Sibrova flew over 1,000 missions, more than any other member of the regiment. 1,000 nights of climbing into a plywood coffin with no parachute and gliding over men who wanted to kill her. When a plane was hit by a tracer round, it burned. The canvas caught first, then the plywood, then the fuel. The women described it simply, like a match. The plane would be consumed before it reached the ground. There was no time to jump. There was no parachute to open. The crew burned with the aircraft. 32 women of the 588th died this way. Their average age was 21. The survivors didn't stop. They flew the next night, and the next. They mourned at dawn and fought at dusk. They sharpened navigation pencils and used them as lipstick before climbing into the cockpit. They painted flowers and stars on the fuselages of planes that might not come back. Marina Raskova, the woman who had made it all possible, never saw her regiment's greatest triumphs. In January 1943, her plane went down in bad weather near Stalingrad. She was 30 years old. She was given a state funeral, and her ashes were interred in the Kremlin wall. The 588th flew on without her. In February 1943, the regiment was honored with the Guards designation, an elite title reserved for units that had demonstrated exceptional bravery. They were reorganized as the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. Later that year, they received the honorific Taman for their role in operations on the Taman Peninsula. 23 members of the regiment were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor the country could bestow. 2 more received the Hero of the Russian Federation after the fall of the Soviet Union. 1 received the Hero of Kazakhstan. When the war ended in May 1945, the regiment was disbanded. The women went home, and almost immediately, the world that had needed them decided it no longer wanted them. The Soviet Union, for all its rhetoric about gender equality, expected its women to return to domestic life after the war. The night witches were encouraged to marry, have children, and forget the things they had done in the dark above the Eastern Front. Many struggled with what we now call PTSD. Many found that the country they had bled for had no place for women who had dropped 23,000 tons of bombs on the enemy. Nadyezhda Popova, 852 missions, 42 bullet holes in one plane, married a fellow pilot after the war. She raised a son. She worked as a flight instructor. She lived to be 91. Near the end of her life, she said, "I sometimes stare into the blackness and close my eyes. I can still imagine myself as a young girl up there in my little bomber. And I ask myself, Nadia, how did you do it?" Plywood wings, canvas skin, no parachutes, no guns, no radar. A stopwatch, a compass, and a pencil. 8 to 18 missions a night. 30,000 total. 23,000 tons of bombs. 32 women killed. 23 heroes of the Soviet Union. Average age, 21. And the only warning was a sound like a broomstick sweeping through the air. Nachthexen, the Night Witches.